Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's a lot more fun when you're here than when you're not. Probably is for you, too. I'm Robert McBride. I work at All Classical FM in Portland, I'm happy to say, and I'm also happy to say I'm here with the beloved music director of the Oregon Symphony, Carlos Kalmar.
Good evening.
You, sir, have a very splendid concert for us tonight, starting off with two pieces that I've never heard in concert, one that I've never heard at all. I've never heard any music by this Lindbergh fellow. I've seen his name a few times. And then there's the Britten Violin Concerto, which I didn't even know existed until about a year ago. What a fabulous piece. And all of a sudden people are playing it, and there's a couple of great recordings out. And
See, I have known this piece, the Britten Violin Concerto, already 3.5 years.
so where... It's just been hiding, and suddenly it's time. It's kind of like the Korngold Concerto. People ignored it for a long time, and all of a sudden it's being played, and I think it's great.
Although there are substantial differences.
Musically, they're rather different. Yeah.
Oh, holy.
So how did you find out about the Britten Concerto?
I found out about the Britten Concerto because an orchestra asked me to conduct it with a soloist there in Dublin, in Ireland. And of course, I'm always very curious, and I said, yeah, sure. And then I looked up and said, aha, Britten wrote a violin concerto. Never heard of that. And then I discovered a piece that is astonishing. It's phenomenal. And I thought, like the same, you will think probably the same. You think, why haven't we heard this? Why has not anybody played it? Why are we here in Portland, Oregon? One of the, I wouldn't say the first ones, but one of the extremely few orchestras that play this concerto this year. This should be played way more often. And as far as Lindbergh goes, or at least the audience here is acquainted with Lindbergh a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit, because the last time, if you remember, we have one of our guest conductors who comes here, well, I try to bring him regularly, Hannu Lintu, this very tall Finnish guy. Last time he brought a piece by Lindbergh called Feria, and that was considerably more music than what you hear today. There is very little we can say about the piece you're going to hear tonight, because actually it's over pretty much before it even starts. It's that short. It's like playing the overture to Carmen. It's like you play it and goodbye. And this is, it's not even, well, it is a complete piece, but it is just the last movement of a composition that treats a theme by Henry Purcell, the great English composer, and makes variations out of it. And instead of asking one composer to write a couple of variations, they ask several composers to each of them write only one. And the Lindbergh is the last movement, grand finale. And that's it. It must be a very interesting piece. I do not know the entire piece. I only know the Lindbergh.
How did you find this one?
It was kind of a good fit in regards to what we are doing tonight. First of all, it offers contrast. It sets up the stage. If you want to you even can label it as it's what we call a parking overture, meaning designed for everybody who comes late to the concert and looks for parking. All of that. And it also sets up everything nicely in the sense of it's by far the most modern piece on the program, but it is looking way backwards into the Baroque area of England, and also, well, English music, Benjamin Britten, English guy. You have lots of things to admire, but in a way, the piece you're going to hear at the start of the concert reminds me of going into these incredibly fancy restaurants where you eat 9 courses, all of them this small, you know, and you pay an insane amount of money, which I like to do. And before you even start eating, the servers come to your table and say, we have greetings from the kitchen, and they give you an appetizer to the appetizer. This is an appetizer.
I love meals like that too, where you're there for a couple of hours.
Oh,
It
yeah.
just takes up your whole evening. Oh, they're just wonderful.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's variations on a theme by Henry Purcell, as you mentioned. And the last movement of the Britten Violin Concerto is a set of variations on a passacaglia, in the form of a passacaglia, which is an old Baroque form. So, in that respect, they make a nice pairing.
Even that makes a great thing. Well, there are, of course, it stops right there. Because the Lindbergh is actually, it's a lot of fun. It's like the other pieces by Lindbergh that I know. It's pretty massive, big orchestra, and it's a little bit what we call wacky, crazy, but with real musicality. So there is this juxtaposition of themes, and things go together and seem to crash, and then they resolve themselves, and as I said, and then it's over.
Tonight's program is underwritten by Smart Park. No, it's not really. But there will be some latecomers tonight, probably because of the heavy rain, and that'll slow the traffic down. Both the Britten Violin Concerto and the Symphony No. 1 by Mahler that we'll hear in the second half of the concert were written by men in their 20s, which I think is pretty cool. I mean, these pieces are really something for guys that young. The Mahler First Symphony may be the most original First Symphony written by anybody. The Britten Concerto I read yesterday was the first music by Benjamin Britten that was performed in America at its premiere in New York.
Yeah, right.
Wow, what an ear opener that must have been.
And on top of that, for extremely different reasons, and also the way it's done, both pieces have this, ultimately, have the character in part of haunted music. Very, gives you the chills. I would dare to say the Britten way more than the Mahler. And of course the reasons for that are very, very different. The Violin Concerto by Benjamin Britten has been written during the Spanish Civil War. And it's another one of the pieces that this English composer wrote that deals with the fact that Benjamin Britten was a very ardent pacifist, strongly opposed to any kind of war. And there we have already the reason, I believe so, why this piece is not incredibly popular and why it has not been played. Because you mentioned, very rightly so, Erich Wolfgang Korngold's Violin Concerto, which last year all of you heard played by Jun Iwasaki, so wonderfully memorable performance. Now, Korngold's piece, which was written a little bit after the Britten, is exuberant, brilliant, Hollywoodesque, and also makes a very standard use of what a concerto is, meaning fast first movement, slow second, very fast last movement, and it ends with big splashes of virtuosic music and everybody's on their feet. Wow! The Britten doesn't care at all for making virtuosic music just because virtuosic music is fun. It is very virtuosic, but for a very different reason, and also it reverses completely how a concerto is constructed. Instead of fast, slow, fast, it is slow, fast, slow, and that makes a difference. And it ends very much with as you said, with this passacaglia, but in a very, it's gripping, and it's slow, and it's very soft-spoken at the end, and there is not this feeling of resolution at all. The good news, I really love this concerto. The good news is it starts very differently. It starts in a way like a pleasant landscape, meaning incredibly lyrical, tender melodies through the voice of an Englishman that wrote this piece in the middle of the 20th century. And that's the way he uses a little, it's not even a theme, it's a motive. It's astounding. The piece starts with two instruments that actually never start a concert, you might think. It starts with the timpani and the cymbals. For 3 bars, that's all you hear. And then, little by little, the orchestra joins. And some people say that this is an homage to Ludwig van Beethoven, who also started his violin concerto with the timpani. But then comes this wonderful melody that takes you away, and it's just very, very beautiful. And I would dare to say that the first movement travels in a way to heaven. It has a little bit in the middle when it gets more energetic. On one side, the musical melodies it sounds a little like disparity, meaning that the range of the melody usually range like an arch this way, and this goes very up and down, and the strings hammer against the melody, and that is already you see that the anguish pushing. Nonetheless, ends again with this lyrical theme in a way that is astonishing, and the motive is this time in the solo violin. And then we get to the second movement that reminds everybody always about another fellow composer of Benjamin Britten by the name of Dmitri Shostakovich. It's a very fast scherzo, very biting and maybe sometimes even sarcastic. Shostakovich is very sarcastic. Britten may be a little bit different, but I just point one thing out to you. It goes very fast, but you will hear it. One of the astounding moments in the second movement is when there is a middle section that is gives you the sense a little more quiet. And when that ends and we go back, you hear actually a duet by two instruments that you never hear in that way, and it sounds completely out of what you can imagine in music. The highest and the lowest instrument of the orchestra, as far as wind instruments are concerned, are going to play a duet for 20 seconds only. Very fast, means you hear extremely high-pitched piccolo flutes against tuba down there. And that's it's a little bit like, wow. And in this second movement, mostly in this second movement, is all the virtuosity that you can imagine. It is a piece insanely difficult for the soloist, completely over the top. This is not my day in terms of the mic. No, it's fine. I just have to be very directional. And then we come to the cadenza, standard cadenza. And then at the end of cadenza starts the third movement, this Passacaglia, dark from the beginning, really pushing this idea of, I think you can feel this, two things. You can feel the longing for resolution that eventually will not really happen at the end. And you can also feel something that I learned has something to do with Benjamin Britten as a person, which is linked to the word solitude and austerity. On one side, Benjamin Britten was born and lived in a part of England that is, it's very austere. It might be on the sea and have beaches, but it's not like when we were here to wherever we go here on the coast, where it's like stunningly beautiful. It's a very different type. And second, Britten was not a human being that had an easy life because, of course, his homosexuality was a problem at that time. And that and the Spanish Civil War gets you. And there are variations that get more and more kind of more energetic. You hear even trumpets and timpani in that last movement that remind you of military very clearly. And then at the end there is this chorale where you think, if we would play for you the chorale without the soloist there, you would have the most wonderful experience of tender music and peace. But it is, the technique he uses is, the orchestra plays this tender music and the soloist comments. And the comments by the soloist are always anguish, pain, and so it ends.
It's probably not a way you'd want to end a concert, but it's a wonderful way to end the first half of a concert. And you've got the intermission to sort of absorb it and mull it over and think about it. And then we move into the Mahler, which starts very softly and then builds from there to the exciting end of the evening. I had a delightful dream a couple of years ago about Benjamin Britten and his partner, Peter Pierce. I was having dinner at their home in Aldeburgh with, 6 or 8 other people, and they were wonderful hosts, and their home was full of art, which I have since learned it is. And I commented on one particular sculpture that I really liked, and they gave it to me.
And you brought it here?
It's one of my favorite dreams of all time.
Where is it?
Where is that? I better look in the attic when I get home. It's up in this attic somewhere. That's the problem. Speaking of timpani, the principal timpanist in the Oregon Symphony is retiring after these concerts, after a long career. So to give him this Britten concerto, which all he has to do in this, and then Mahler 1, what a way to go out.
This is a good way to go out of your working life, because, boy, he has a lot to do tonight, really.
He's going to earn that gold watch tonight. Okay, Mahler, Symphony number 1. I hate to admit this, but I'm kind of a wimp when it comes to the Mahler symphonies. I like 1 and 4 the best because they're the shortest, they're the most straightforward, they're the easiest to digest. They don't sprawl on for an hour and a half, and they're not as angst-ridden. So there, I said it.
So dinner is ready earlier.
Well, yeah. Now, Mahler wrote a lot of songs in addition to his symphonies, and in his early symphonies, he quotes a number of his songs, and that's very true in this one. Have you ever made a systematic study of which song is used where and how?
No. Yeah. No, I just, I hope at least that in terms of the songs being used, I know them all. There is one song that I know this much, so at least at this point I have to study it again so I could hypothetically sing it. The obvious, let's state the obvious. The way he uses the songs is mostly the Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen, songs of a wayfarer. And that is in the first movement, it is in the third movement. Top of that, in the third movement, there is this very famous Frère Jacques song that is one of the most famous songs anyway.
Turned into a funeral march.
Turned into a funeral march. Really.
Played grotesquely by a solo double bass higher than he's comfortable playing. It's very weird.
It's weird, but it's wonderful. And on top of that, there is one little song in the trio of the second movement, which is only a piano song. Doesn't belong to the orchestra. It's called Hans und Grete. Now, this, we could bore you to death in our pre-concert talk.
Let's!
No. Oh. Talking and discussing the different versions of the symphony, meaning what Mahler wrote first, why, what he dismissed later, and yawn, right?
And do you play that repeat in the first movement or not? And yeah, crazy.
Yes, I do, by the way.
Oh, do you?
Of course. Yeah. The real thing is this symphony you're going to hear is very clearly divided in two sections. The first two movements belong together and the last two belong together. And yes, there was another movement that he later dismissed because it's too long anyway. This is kind of one of the shorter symphonies by Gustav Mahler because it's over, I hope, in less than 1 hour. But it's a quite substantial piece of music. The great thing is that the first two movements treat a little bit the idea of nature and of a human in nature, whereas the two last movements have the probably most the favorite topics of Gustav Mahler that he always used in his music, which is struggle and death. He must have been an Austrian composer. And of course, I mean, we all know when we play Mahler here and there and we get acquainted with his music and when we study it, that the music of Gustav Mahler is sometimes you play it and then you think, you go off stage and you think the next thing you need to do is go to see your psychotherapist and tell him about the experience you just had because it's so up and down emotionally. Now, this symphony, yes, it is up and down, but it's still very controlled. I would say you don't need to see Dr. Freud right away. Wait maybe 2 more symphonies and then you're in trouble.
Yeah, or even see Dr. Freud before the damn concert, you know. Some of his symphonies. He was an amazing, amazing talent, amazing man in many ways. I love the way he begins this symphony with this simple note in 7 octaves in the strings. And conductor Benjamin Zander has described it as the A that is the sound of the universe, and the reason we can hear it here is because God turned it up a little for us. And then it's like a perfect morning on a perfect spring day, and it's just so beautiful.
It is beautiful, and you have to let yourself into it, because I'm a very strong believer. I mean, I would dare to say it's in the music, just read it, that you have to wait until it develops. It's this sense of warmth and nature. Of course, it has the picture you have in mind, if you have any picture, is in the woods, afternoon, and you just enjoy the glimpses of sun, one animal here, a bird there, and that's all there is. And then, little by little, nature comes to life. And then nature explodes, because nature is bigger than we are.
And the second movement is sort of a rustic, sort of heavy-footed rustic dance kind of thing. And then the third movement, we mentioned this odd funeral march, which is interrupted by what sounds like klezmer music, which, when this symphony was first performed back in the 1880s, must have just blown people's minds. What is this? Later, Charles Ives would make a name for himself by having all these different sounds crash each other's parties, and that's just what happens in this third movement. And it's so wonderful and amazing and weird, and even now it sounds bizarre.
There is one, actually the third movement with his funeral march refers to a painting very clearly, and when you see the painting, I think it's Moritz von Schwind painting, a friend of Schubert's, which is the hunter's funeral, which is, the hunter is dead and his coffin is being escorted through the woods and carried by the deer. And the other animals sing along with a band of musicians in the back, which is, of course, a quite bizarre idea. And that's exactly this is the movement where you have Mahler as it will be in his later music, meaning the juxtaposition between the sublime and the bizarre, and turning things that are beautiful into complete irony is astounding. And he does just takes a switch, and he doesn't even do it in a brutal way. It just happens. And on top of that, another real Mahler issue is the fact that there is this, what I call the Yiddish influence so much in the third movement. And then in the middle of he kind of goes in a different direction, and the music gets even more quiet, and he uses this other song of the Wayfarer and comments on futility of life a little bit, and it's so beautiful. My favorite part, in a way. And then the funeral march comes back. This time he gets very rude for 15 seconds, and then the funeral march dies down. And then starts the last movement with a real cry of pain in the orchestra, and it gets enormously big, loud, fast, driven, high energy.
We're almost out of time. But be on the lookout for 7 horns standing up and doing their best to drown out the rest of the orchestra in the finale. It's glorious. You're going to love it.
Yeah, the thing is, of course, that this is the evolution of Gustav Mahler during his 9 symphonies, or let's say even 10. In his early symphonies, there is this struggle. And at the end, the mankind, the struggle of the one human being, in this case the Titan, is winning the struggle. This ends in glory. Second Symphony, Resurrection. We have played it in, I think, 2003 or something like that. Ends in glory. Fourth Symphony, no glory, but it ends in heaven, very quietly. And then there is already trouble. With the later symphonies, I don't know whether the human wins. And when it comes to the last 2 great works that Mahler completed for an orchestra, meaning the Song of the Earth and the Symphony number 9, actually the end is not the triumph, the end is always death. So you have the life of a personal composer like Gustav Mahler right there in his music.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing this time with Carlos Kalmar, learning about tonight's concert, which will help you enjoy the concert even more. And this talk has been videotaped, and you can recommend that to your friends at the website allclassical.org. Thank you, Maestro.
Thank you, Robert.